Hi, everyone. Welcome to my interview with Dr. Jef Caers, professor at the University of Stanford and also founder of Mineral X, a community dedicated to sustainable mining. Dr. Caers, could you please introduce yourself a little more?
Yes, hello. Nice to meet you, Carrie. Yes, as you said, I'm professor of Earth and Planetary Sciences here at Stanford University, and my main focus lies on building out the critical mineral supply chain that is needed for the transition to renewable energy. And so that's why I started this new group, Mineral X. I'm originally from Belgium, and I've been at Stanford for 26 years, and yeah, that's sort of the main introduction, I think.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So you are a geostatistician by trade, is that right?
That's correct. So I got a degree in mining engineering, and then my PhD focused on geostatistics. At that time, it was for diamonds. Then I went to Stanford and focused on oil and gas. I've been in Saudi Arabia a couple of times for that, and I've been teaching courses there. And recently, I focus my area of geostatistics and also data science in general to the mineral space.
That's quite interesting. Do you mind if I ask which university or school you taught at in Saudi Arabia?
That was for Saudi Aramco, so the oil and gas company. Yes,
Oh, yes, yeah.
in Iran. Yeah,
Wow, okay. I live in Dhahran, so
there you
uh,
go.
that's really nice. So I know that you are the founder of Mineral X. Could you tell us a little more about the motivation behind creating this community and what you see in its future potential?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. So Mineral X, I started actually only last year. And one of the motivations is that in order to change our world to different energy sources, we're going to need a lot of minerals, critical minerals for batteries, for wind energy. And so where these minerals are going to come from is actually quite unclear at this moment. There is going to be a lot of demand for lithium and copper, nickel and cobalt and so on. And so there's the first question is about how do we discover those minerals? Second question, how do we mine them in a sustainable fashion? But then also looking at recycling in the very end. If we want to build a circular economy, we'll have to recycle those minerals. But at the same time, mining can be quite disruptive for local communities, can be quite destructive for the environment. So we can't just think about let's get more of these minerals. We have to think about how is it going to affect the world and the people around it. And of course, there are some really difficult cases that have been documented, such as in the Congo, the DRC, where child labor is being used. So we are at an excellent opportunity here of to do it different. And so that's why my group focuses on one side on the technological innovation, but then also on the community engagement and the environmental impact of future mining.
Right. And I have to ask, I see that a lot of Mineral X's content is public and it's online. So is that also one of your, I guess, wishes for, is this to educate people about this topic? Is that why it's, something that you talk about a lot?
Yeah, so I'm very much in favor of, as you say, things being online and in the open, so everybody can use them, and not to, make it intellectual property that only very few people can use it. And so that's why we put a lot of our software and our methodologies available for everybody to use. I've also started in that context what is called an industrial affiliates program, which is a sort of program where industry can join, and it's open to everybody. It's a very open program, that companies can join, but there's no intellectual property that is involved or whatnot. So all the companies join and they can exchange ideas in the open. And also we had an introductory or inaugural symposium at Stanford, and that was also open to everybody, where there were members of the government, non-governmental organization, as well as companies, students, representatives of the area that are affected by mining. And so that's why I strongly believe that creating an open community where everybody is present and has a seat at the table is really key to solving these important problems.
Yes, I totally stand by that goal as well. I think information should be, an open source. Everyone should have the rights to access. Um, and if we just talk a little more about your ties with sustainability, so you recently did an event for Scientists Speak Up and Coalition for True School Sustainability. I think it was a Stanford event. It
That's
was
correct.
very touching, and obviously you addressed a lot of deep topics that were personal.
Mhm.
And I found it really interesting how you connected your personal journey to
Mhm.
your transition out of petroleum industry. So could you
Yeah.
perhaps talk a little bit more about why you chose to go into renewable energy and resources?
Yeah, well, that's a very important question. So I think I learned out of my personal struggles, things like with mental health and addiction and other physical disease. That a very important part is that to start to think differently about the status quo of your life, right? So if you really have difficulties in your life, then you really have to think about, well, should I change my behavior? Is there something about my behavior that is, that can be improved, or how do I even deal with these very challenging problems? And so you really have to, number one, you have to be I say, very much in tune with yourself and your own feelings, to know that, and so listen to you very carefully. And so I listened to myself very carefully, and I think that I made a career in oil and gas, and that was wonderful. I made many friends, including in Saudi Arabia, that I met. But I think that was, that was when I visited Saudi Arabia. That was in 99 or 2000. That was a very different world then, and we now know more. And I felt that the oil and gas companies, they're doing well on their own, and they don't necessarily need my help anymore. And so that my focus in my life and in my work should go more in different direction. And so that's why, after a long debate with myself, this is years of thinking about it. I decided that I really need to make a change in my life, live a better, more healthy life, but also in my career, and focusing really on the very pressing issues that are there today. And so doesn't mean I'm against oil and gas at all. That's just not the case. I think still oil and gas are going to be an important energy source, but I just feel that my skills are just needed elsewhere, and that's what I ended up making that choice. That's why I ended up making that choice.
Right. And actually, I feel like when I think about sustainable energy, we tend to think about, wind energy, solar energy, but you actually you stayed within your expertise of geology and geophysics, and you instead kind of like carved out a side of it that was about sustainability and about the future and renewable
Yeah.
energy. What was that decision-making process like?
Um, you know, in a way, I saw that what I was doing was quite general. So my work is around decision making under uncertainty for Earth resources. And so about 6 years ago, I included into that other Earth resources such as water and geothermal. And I felt that these general ideas and skills that they can be used into different domains. So I'm not personally in my work, I'm more of a generalist, and that's very specific, doing something very specific, and more thinking broadly about these problems of decision making, which is decision science, and uncertainty quantification, which is probability and machine learning and data science, and then and then also linked to that the geosciences, right? So those kind of skills around being an engineer interested in decision making, being a scientist around data science and also around geoscience, I think that combination is quite unique. And that's what I built my career on. And so it wasn't very hard to make that change. What's very hard is, and it's the same problems we have in changing our energy system, is that we're just very used to the current system. So I was very used to working with the oil and gas companies, and it was sort of very reliable. I know all the people in there, and I got funding through an affiliates program. And so it's just very difficult to make a change in one's career, to say, well, I'm stopping that funding, and in academia that's a big decision, and I want to go into new funding. And so that's very difficult, and it's the same difficulty that we have, in changing our energy system. But I also felt that that change that I had made in my life was difficult, but it led to something that was much more worthy, I felt, and much more interesting, instead of sticking always with the same thing. So, you're very young, I'm much older, and so, change in life is hard, but it's often needed. And so we like to stick with our comfortable area, and so moving out of that comfortable zone and going into something else. And then afterwards, you realize that's actually the right choice, and it's actually very exciting as well, and keeps like the energy going instead of doing always the same thing. So I think that's where I learned from my personal experience that change is needed, and it is with uncertainty, and it can be very scary with lots of anxiety, but in the end, you can believe in yourself and come out of it in a better way. And I think it's been amazing since I made a change in December. We had a very successful symposium with over 200 people there, and I've started a new affiliates program. I've met so many new people, and that are very, in management, in sustainability and climate. And so it has been the right choice, even if though there was a lot of fear related to that.
Right. And wonderful response. And you mentioned a bit about funding as well as money, the motivations that everyone
Right.
seems to be part of these days in the world. Also in your speech at the Scientists Speak Up event, could you perhaps touch a little more on that detail?
On the funding, you mean?
Yeah, on the funding and why it's so hard for people to change
Yeah.
their career paths or, jobs.
Yeah, it's just when you start a scientific career, then it takes some time to build up your relationships, and then once you build up your relationships, you have easy access to funding, and the oil and gas industry has been a very reliable source of funding, and they still are. And so switching funding to different sources, particularly in the area of sustainability, is difficult. Although in the United States today, with the new law that was passed here in the United States, a lot of funding is now going into the area of climate tech and sustainability. There's a lot of startups. For example, three of my latest students, they are now doing startups in the area of climate tech and sustainability. Instead of say, I want to do an academic position, or I want to work for Saudi Aramco or work for ExxonMobil, they're saying, I want to do a startup. It's much more exciting. It's an exciting time of change, and there's a lot of opportunity. And so they want to be part as a younger generation, and they want to be part of that excitement and that change. And so that's and as an older person, it's just much more difficult to do. And so giving something up that I've relied on for such a long time is just very hard to do. So yeah, that was a difficult decision in the end.
Right. And is it right to say that, maybe it's easier for younger people to pursue their dreams without the fear of being controlled by money? Is that what you're also trying to say?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, is that when you get older and you have a family, or you have a house, and you have to pay bills, and that's everything gets more locked in. And when you're young, maybe just starting out a family, or you're just in a position where you where you're trying to decide what to do, you're much more adventurous, and that's normal. And but sometimes I felt, you know, by making this change, I felt suddenly much younger. I felt like instead of being a full professor, I felt like I was an assistant professor again, because I had to apply for lots of funding as a new person. So that's I think that's the difficulty, but that's also where the reward lies.
I was listening to your presentation for, again, Science to Speak Up, and I realized you are very open about a lot of the things that may be stigmatized. And I feel like, you know, as a person that is part of the larger science community, you don't hear about these things a lot. So
No.
I'm wondering, sometimes is it intentional that you want to be open and communicate? Is it intentional because you want to represent or have other people feel represented within
Yeah.
this community?
It wasn't an easy decision, you know. When you are confronted initially with all these problems, you feel a lot of guilt and even shame about what you are and who you are and how you got there. You can, by being open, you can create not just a better life for yourself, but also for other people, that they may start to accept who they are.
Right. Wow, that was such an eloquent response, and definitely you have a very profound message. Um, and to wrap up the interview, I just want to ask you, what would be the biggest advice you would give to high school students?
To high school students, okay. Wow, that's a difficult question. Um, I think that you know, we often, I think you're at that at age, and particularly at any age, we tend to compare ourselves with others, right? This is how am I relative to somebody else? You look, and typically now, of course, with social media, it's easy to compare yourself something to somebody that you adore or you find amazing, or the people are very successful. And I would say, really, growth comes from not comparing on the outside, but comparing on the inside, right? Is really thinking about who you are, and not compare. We always say, don't compare your inside with the outside of somebody else, right? Because that can lead to unhappiness if you constantly compare yourself with an ideal outside. Now, we all know now that these ideals that we think they are not ideals at all. So, for example, we know on Instagram and other social media that people that look happy are not happy. So that's why I think grounding yourself and listening to yourself on your own desires and what you really want and how you feel, being in touch with your feelings on the inside is really the key to a happy life, because then I think you start to make the right decisions, the right life choices, for your job or for your friends or for your family. And I think that's really key. If I want to go back in time, that's what I would focus on more. Yeah.
Right. And I certainly keep that in mind. I mean,
Okay.
I'm kind of
Yeah.
at that age. Yeah. And that wraps up our interview. Thank you, Dr. Caers, for such an enlightening discussion with me. And thank you to everyone that's watched this video.
Yeah. Thank you, Carrie, for having me. It's a pleasure.